Hello, and welcome back to the God the Artist podcast. I'm your host, Morgan McCarver, and today I'm with a very special guest, Alan C. Paul. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Morgan, it is such an honor and pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me here.
It's really special for those of you who have been with me longer than just this year. I recorded podcasts as a guest for a while, and so I actually was on your show, Alan, probably 2 years ago now. And it's one of those things where great Christian artists connect, and then we go our separate ways. And surprisingly, I missed the Podmatch community and podcasting community, and so. Now that I'm back as a host, I'm so glad that you were willing to come on my show as a guest.
Well, as soon as I saw your name and your, profile pop up as a podcast host, I was like, sign me up. Your episode is one of our best. I'm not just making that up, not buttering you up. It is one of the best and the most comprehensive episodes that we've done on your field because remember when you came on, I had never had anyone who was in ceramics and talking about that area. And I was just so blessed to hear your story. And now I just want to make sure I can help and, continue to hopefully inspire some of your listeners as well.
Yes, thank you so much. You are well, you're a lot of things, but right now you're a musician, right? As well as a business owner, coach. Um,
Yep. It always starts with the music. I always use the four words to kind of start it up. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a creative, and I'm forgiven. But the creative started with music. It creative started with piano back when I think I was 2 years old. My mom tells me I don't remember, but that's been my life. Piano, just 88 keys. Never really learned any. I did do a little bit of band instruments, a little bit, but nothing that was serious. So yeah, it's always been piano as a full time musician.
wow, that's awesome. I admire you so much. I cannot read music. I just am impressed. That is a language that I never could figure out how to learn.
I mean, just like every other artistic thing, right? It's like it's so funny that I've looked at other instruments like guitar and be like, I don't understand how do they think that way and how do my fingers go that way, and then clarinet or flute, and of course, and obviously all the other artistic disciplines. And I just feel like it's so funny how even us as artists, we feel like this awe of people who do something else, and yet we have in some way, shape, or form achieved learned how to get over that hump of this looks really hard,
Hmm.
and we
Hmm.
still managed to do it. But it's so funny how each one of us respect it. I love that. It's respect, right? So I'm sure you can master anything you put your mind to. But yeah, your gifting falls into a certain area where God kind of just made your mind and your hands and your art form where it just works for you. And so piano just works for me, and other art forms don't. So I'm sticking with what I know.
Yeah, yeah, you're wired in that specific way. Is that when you would say your creativity kind of started for you?
Yeah, it definitely started with like just the fact that my parents and my mom obviously was my first music teacher, but my dad a singer, not really a singer, like a lover of music. He was never a musician, but he would sing around the house and stuff and just have all these records. And I would listen to his, Earth, Wind and Fire and Commodores and Paul Simon and James Taylor, like just the gamut. There was no genre that he wasn't listening to. And so I was exposed to it. Obviously, I got to play in church at a very young age. That exposed me to the church and the spiritual side of actually doing worship music and hymns and everything else, and then the classical. So I was surrounded by it. So it's almost like how like people assume you're going to become a musician because you're surrounded by it. Well, I had every opportunity to absorb it in that way. So that was my first creative outlet. But there was other outlets. There was writing. I enjoyed writing as a kid. I enjoyed reading obviously goes along with that. So kind of like the literary part of me was being stimulated. And so I think again, if you look 40 as an adult 40 years later, you're like, oh, all these things still combine. I still write, I still play, I still enjoy connecting with people through those mediums. And so yeah, but I think the first thing is always those childlike moments of wonder and passion that God awakens when you really don't know what you want to do. And you're just like, oh, this looks cool. I'm going to stick with it.
Oh yeah, wow. That opened up so many questions. I'm trying to figure out where where to start. Um, but well, does that go into how you create your business? Tell us, I guess, tell us your story or your testimony, what you would consider kind of how you got to where you are today.
Well, yeah, definitely a long and winding road. And, since we're talking to a lot of our fellow believers, I use my favorite scripture, Psalm 25 and 10, which is all the paths, plural, of the Lord are full of mercy and truth to those who keep his commandments. And I'm definitely taking several winding paths. So to try to make a super long story super short, I did again study piano in college or high school. Really, in college, went from classical to jazz because I thought the cool kids were over in the jazz school, and so I started to shift from learning classical as a student. But I was always learning pop music at the same time. I was like trying to learn by ear, so I was always able to play by ear, even as I was learning in the classical field, learning to play, read music and stuff like that. And so when I got to college, I realized, well, you know what? Being a professional musician seems really hard. So let me go into teaching. And so I went to become a music educator. I was still playing and still playing in church, but it wasn't like, I didn't consider it like that was going to be like my full-time job. My job was going to be a music educator because I needed to pay the bills, right? Well, it turns out that God kind of pushed me a little bit to say, hey, you can still be a teacher, but you should be focusing on worship music. You should be focusing on church because I would be teaching the kids. Taught elementary, and I loved it. But I would be in there teaching the kids, the wheels on the bus go round and around, and thinking about I had to teach, Amazing Grace when I got to choir rehearsal. So my brain kept going back and forth. And I felt this calling into ministry to really focus on the music ministry. So I became a full-time minister of music around, after 8 years of teaching. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. That was my first leaving one job, one passion to start another one that was close, but not exactly the same. The second half goes to where God does something even more strange. And he says to me about 5 or 6 years into ministry, hey, maybe you're not supposed to be a full-time minister of music. Maybe you're not supposed to be a full-time worship minister. And I'm like, wait, this is what you called me to do, right? God, like that's what you're supposed to do. You're a Christian, you love God and you serve him all the time. And that's what you do. You go into a church and you serve all the time. But God was putting something in my heart that was not what he had for me. I had gotten a jazz degree. And for some reason, I started feeling this like, well, I'm not really using this specific skill. And so, Morgan, the crazy story is I handed my pastor at the time my resignation letter at the time that he was trying to hand me my promotion letter
Oh my
because he was
goodness.
about to promote me to senior whatever associate. And I was like, God told me it's time for me to leave. So here I am with no job. I gave
Wow.
away. My wife looking at me like, you're crazy. Well, she went along with it, thank God, but I'm sure she thought I was crazy. And 3 days later, I got a call from my current church to go ahead and start playing part-time, but that still was part-time income. So now how do I figure out the rest of this my income? Well, I start playing gigs again. So I'm playing for $50 and some fish dip in a blues club somewhere, wondering how in the heck do I make this actual life going? Because I'd never actually been a professional musician. So all that long story just to mean now I am doing all those things. I am still working in the church. I play professionally, jazz, blues, whatever, have keyboard, will travel. And I now am trying to help other musicians figure out that line of I am a musician, a creative, an artist that works in the mainstream arts and entertainment space, but I also love God and I may even serve in the church. And how do I blend those two worlds? So God and gigs came out of that story. How do I figure out that balance? And so the platform that I now try to help people with is that very line, how to succeed as a creative without sacrificing your faith.
That's beautiful. That I love your title too, God and Gigs. That's awesome. I love alliterations.
Yes, let me try.
Um,
Yes, I won't
yeah.
tell you the original alliteration. It was much cornier.
Oh, really?
Yes, if you okay, I will say it because I would basically set myself up. Now I have
Yeah,
to say
yeah.
it.
Now we have
So
to hear it.
it was originally Jesus and Jazz, which
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
was
that's not terrible.
not okay. Thank you for that compliment. Not terrible. That says everything you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So how do you do that? How do you remain a Christian artist in a secular world, especially with secular songs? Like that's a whole avenue that I haven't even considered as an artist who isn't really involved in music at all.
Well, I think the first thing is I love starting with the fact that God made everything, and even the word secular is a modern word. In the ancient days, I'm not going to go into theology or stuff, but even in most cultures, even if they didn't believe in the Christian or the one God, right? They had many gods, all these different tribes and so, right? But they still thought God was in everything. They didn't have a line that said, "Oh, this is secular. This has nothing to do with God." And over here, this does have something to do with God. There was no comprehension of that. So even the idea that there's something that doesn't involve God is new. It's something that we kind of came up with to kind of put God in a box and then put regular life in this other box. So I always start with that there's a artificial line that we draw. You know, the Bible
Mm,
says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Like everything that we do is for the glory of God, whether or not we realize it. He gives us the power to live and move and have our being. So that's my first comment to anyone. It's like, well, there's not really this line of sacred and secular. It's all sacred. It's just how we use the gifts. Of course, we can use them for good or evil. He gives us that choice. Now, in terms of specifically creatives like you and I, well, we're just like artists, we're just like plumbers, we're just like doctors. We are all supposed to give our gifts for the glory of God and the good of others. And that just means doing it excellently. So, as a musician, I serve by playing music. And that means I need to play it excellently. If I'm playing at a wedding, if I'm playing at a funeral, if I'm playing at somebody's party where they're, having some fun and they request a certain kind of music, I have to have that comprehension and that conviction that, hey, unless I am personally crossing a line, I am there to serve these people. And God would never say, hey, by the way, if you ever play a non Christian song at a wedding where they are doing a little bit of the fun dance, you are just sinning against me. That's not
mm.
what it is. Jesus famously did his first miracle at a wedding where people were celebrating, where clearly I guarantee you there were no hymns being sung at that wedding. I guarantee you once the wine started flowing, it was lit. Okay.
Yeah.
So so, not to say that we can just like throw out our convictions and just ignore that, right? But I think artists, most of the time, I'm talking to artists, you and I, are usually talking to artists that worry too much about that line.
Mm,
I believe the Holy Spirit will tell you, as He told me in the opposite way, when it was time to move into another area, when you need to focus on Him, when something might be critiquing or piercing your spirit, and you are no longer being the influencer, you are now being influenced. Jesus was with gluttons and sinners and prostitutes and all this other stuff that the Bible says, but it never says that Jesus was influenced by them. It says they came to him. And that way he had no problem touching them and being. And so we have to be a light in a dark place. Some of us are called to only stay in the light, and that means working in the church. But some of us are called to go into dark places and present our light so that it may shine before men so that it can see our good works. And our good works, Morgan, honestly, is the work you do, the pizzas you make, the beauty you create, the movies that might deal with sensitive topics, but you deal with it in a redeemed sensibility. And so that's where I tell artists, always make sure that you are the influencer and not the influenced. And that way you can show up and bless people in any way, shape, or form that you do in your creative art.
Powerful stuff. Yeah, I agree. That light in a dark world. I like that phrase. That's really powerful. Um, when would you say you made it as an artist? How would us artists, how does that look for different people?
This is a hard one, and I knew you were going to ask this. The reason why it's so hard is because comparison, right?
Hmm.
Everybody has this idea of, oh, once I have this many followers on Instagram, once I have this particular income, once I have this particular thing, then we usually use somebody else's metric, right? We use someone else's metric to decide success. And I know it sounds cliche, but you really do have to decide what success means to you. For me, success has been being able to live out my creative calling in a place where my wife still loves me, my family still loves me, I'm able to make an income, and I'm able to be a good influence on my artistic community. That's it. Now, would I like to have more followers? Of course. Would I like to have more income? Absolutely. But my overall goal has been to be a Christian and a musician and artist of character. Now, I'm not going to say I've made it that way, right? But that's my goal. My goal is not just financial. So I think making it is getting to that place where you are doing the best work you can for the best community that you can, the best kind of family and kind of environment and community that you can create and make that right for you. Now, for some people, they do need to reach a little higher and they want to have big goals. But I don't think we can ever set those goals higher. Number one, they should ask God about what their success should be if they're asking that question. And number two, they should be honest and say, hey, do I really need this? The Bible says we can be content. But artists, we know we're never totally content.
Hmm.
And that's okay. because later he says, I press on toward the mark. It's okay to be content with, hey, if this is nothing else that happens in my artistic life, I'm okay. But I'm still going to aim high because I never want God to say, you could have had this, but you didn't try. Right. So it's that balancing act. But I would say, honestly, for me, is making it is when I looked around my kind of my world, my artistic world, and I was like, wow, I like the people I work with. I'm generally like I'm not doing like music that really like kind of bugs me to death, and I just wish I could quit. Like that kind of realization, and it didn't happen, to be honest with you, in the last maybe the last 10, 15 years. I started realizing, hey, I need to be grateful for where I'm at. This is making it. This is actually achieving the goal that I set, not just trying to reach some artificial line of this many followers, this many people that love me, this many Grammys, this many whatever. Yeah, it's just it's a personal conviction that you have to really search your heart and seek God for.
Yeah, I think that is so true, especially for the artist world, where, like, yes, you can get a degree, but you don't have to get a degree to call yourself an artist. And so, how, like, unlike doctors or dentists, where you have the degree, you're officially, everyone recognizes you, our world is a little bit more always seeking that validation. And I find that hard for myself too. Like, you're talking about that comparison, like, what do I justify? Do I have to completely be, funded by my art to be an artist, which I originally was like, yeah, I need this to be a full-time thing. And then kind of coming to terms with I make better art when I make what I want instead of making
Mm.
what sells, you know?
That's so
Um,
powerful. And I love the fact I've been kind of leaning on this. I'm going to try this out on you and some of your listeners because I've been trying to figure out how do I describe that where you don't necessarily have to be a full time artist to be fulfilled as an artist. And so the phrase I've been coming up is UCL, unique creator lifestyle. And I
hmm,
think it just blends for whatever area you're in. Maybe you are working your full time job so that you have that freedom. Like you said, that's beautiful. I'm currently kind of like in that hybrid. Well, I work at a church, so I am kind of full time, but I also get to do my freelance music and I get to write and I get to podcast. So, what do you call that? Like, is there a name for it? There's no particular name, right? It's just an artist lifestyle. So, I think unique creator lifestyles vary with, again, what's the particular goal you have right now. And I think so many artists, we have to give ourselves grace. Like, you're not a failure if you didn't sell all of your records and can't go and just write a book deal or something like that, where all of your bills are paid by, again, let's go back to our first thing. What are you doing? Is it for the glory of God? That means if you have your regular 9 to 5 job, it's still for the glory of God, even if it's not artistic, because it's funding your ability to be artistic. So it's actually you just being your own patron, right?
hmm,
And so I think so many of our artists, and I do have a lot of them in our community, our God and Gigs community, that literally are saying, hey, I'm not really creating right now. Am I really, do I deserve to be here? I'm like, yes, you're still an artist. Just because you're not currently creating something, like in between books, in between albums, do you stop being an artist just because you're not currently working on the thing? No, it just means that you're in a Sabbath in a way. You're just kind of letting it rest until the time to pick it up again. So yeah, I think artists, we again kind of talking to our own tribe, right? We got
mm.
to give ourselves a little bit of a break. You don't have to be doing this full time to be a success.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's a song, I think Chris Rensma sings it, but anyway, the line in it is there's four seasons, but there's only one spring. There's only one
Wow.
time of real growth. And then summer, you're kind of maturing that growth. And then fall, you're preparing, and winter, you're resting. And I had never really considered that, but that's exactly what you're describing. Like, we don't have to be full production mode all the time to be
Yeah.
successful. And I think that's really misleading in this culture where, like you said, you got to make the next whatever best song on the Instagram reels or who knows what. That's just not sustainable to be able to find your own creativity and really restore that. Um, yeah. So how do you and your fellow God and Gigs tribe, how do they balance working in a world that does not prioritize art or Christians or Christian art?
Oof. Okay. So I will speak for myself first, right? And it kind of goes back to what I was just speaking about being in both worlds because I do work in a church. I do get to play worship music and minister to the body as part of my job. I'm still in the ministry, right? But I've also reconciled that 99.9% of the people I serve are serving God outside of the church. I have to maintain my view, just like they do, that serving the world through giving their gifts and talents to do whatever they do that they've been gifted to do, accountant, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is just as blessed as me playing a song or creating a piece of art. It's not more blessing in my work because it has like an artistic flair to it. As I mentioned, good works is just good work. So good work can be just a way that you do anything as long as it's to the glory of God and you're doing it to the best of your ability. So I guess for most of us artists that are in the community, it's that same idea of if the world doesn't value what I'm creating, does God find value in it? And do I? And am I doing it in a way where Paul talks about like, hey, you just have to give your all to that task with all of your heart, knowing that you're working for God and not for men. So if men don't recognize, especially Christian art, we get into that whole thing of what Christian art is, right? So yeah, most likely, even inside, I hate to say it, but even inside the Christian, I guess, music industry, I guess you could say, there can be a lot of competition. And well, no one's following me, and no one do they even recognize my gift or my talent. Does God even want me to do this, right? Because you may feel that if God called you to it and you're giving it to the church or you're giving it to Christians and they reject it, it could feel really bad, right? So that's where, again, we have to be very careful not to set up the wrong goal of being recognized. And I know, again, it might sound cliche, but if you just reach one instead of the 99, if that's what you're called to do, you have to get comfortable with that. And I think to your second half of the question, in terms of like the world, yeah, I think it's the same thing. You have to make sure that you're not aiming at the wrong people. I'm called to a certain group of people and I play a certain kind of music and they like it. And the rest of the people, I would be shocked if they ever like even paid attention to one note I played, which that's okay. Like my music is not for everybody. My art is not for everybody. And I can't be concerned with rejection in that sense. But it's just a matter of like really working at it in your own heart and your mind so that you don't get caught up with the, oh, they don't like me, they don't like this, they don't like that. And again, it's a matter of knowing that what you're called to. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's a process that you can continue to work and get more and more comfortable knowing that you're doing exactly the work that God called you to.
Yeah, that's powerful. Do you find yourself avoiding specific songs or types of music in that way, or is it again just I hadn't really thought about that. Secular is a word that we made up, you know. But does that limit you in a way that you choose with your boundaries?
That's the key word. You said boundaries. And I will give you some perfect examples where you can have that kind of icky feeling. And then you realize, okay, God, again, are you calling me to serve here? And it would be like some of these weddings, and I don't want to point out lifestyles. You know what I mean? It already feels judgmental to point out certain lifestyles and things like that. But let's say I'm performing and playing for a certain couple, and they're in a certain lifestyle. And am I celebrating this? Am I, uh, I guess what's it called, signing off on it by being there, or am I at that point serving just like Daniel served in a foreign king's office and Isaiah and every other major prophet who had to serve in a foreign king's court, and had to do, except for the prayer, right? He would go off in his prayer, Daniel would. But other than that, he was serving Babylon. He was literally a servant under the king of Babylon. Moses, you can just go down the list, right? All of these people served under kings, and most of us, we have bosses if we're employed by them. We don't know their spiritual background. We don't know what they're doing with the money that we're earning for them. So we have to be careful, again, not to put that onus on me personally. Well, if he asked me to play this song, unless it is directly, absolutely at that moment in conflict with everything that's in me that God is calling me to do, God gives me a license. He talks about this even in I think it's in Corinthians, where he says, hey, for someone whose faith is weak, I don't do this. I'm not saying that I have stronger faith than everyone, but I'm very aware of my convictions that if I'm playing a certain song, that God is not going to strike me down because it was counter to his word when I'm doing it in a place which is actually the place that he called me to serve in. Again, it's kind of weird and it may sound like it's kind of compromise, but you have to know exactly what that line is for you. And there's different people that should not be doing that because that's not, your faith is not built for that. Your faith, you're not called to that. And so if, the Bible talks about if you are pricked in your conscience, it's sin. You'll know. You'll know when you're like, okay, And there have been times that I haven't really been called off a stage or felt like I had to leave something. But I have friends who have. I have friends who work with major Grammy winning artists, and they were in a green room and they were just like, no, I think I'm done. I'm no longer called to this foreign king. God
Mm,
has given me an out, right? And then you got to take that out and you got to trust him. But for me personally, I have found thankfully that I'm now in most circles where I don't have that struggle because I've made the right decisions along the way to continue to refine my art to where I never really have to make those kind of decisions. But it's a process again. And I don't want anyone to think I'm making it easy or flippant. But I do think that it is something where we have to be very aware that you are not called to be a perfect Christian artist all the time, playing only things that God could use in the church. That's just not reasonable. And honestly, I don't think it's helpful to the rest of the world for you to hide your gift simply to try to appease a standard that doesn't exist.
yeah, that's great advice. I can't remember who said it, but recently I had heard, I don't know if it was a podcast or a sermon, but people talking about um, like we are our own missionaries in our own fields kind of thing. Like you're saying, we can't, like missionaries who are trained to be missionaries aren't going to go up into these businesses where we work or the weddings. Like you don't missionaries don't go to weddings to to evangelize, but like that's where you have your mission field is right there because you're the only one equipped to be able to be in that spot in that moment and serve God and the purpose that he gave you specifically for that moment. um that's yeah, that's great advice. um let's see, what other good questions do I have? What creative accomplishments are you most proud of?
Okay, so it's kind of funny when you say the accomplishment because it's like picking your favorite child, right? Like every
Yeah.
time you finish something or do something that like feels okay, I really pushed to get this done. It can feel like that weight is off your shoulders and you're really proud of it. And then the next minute you're like, okay, I got to do something better because this was the last one. So you almost like cast it aside. So this is back and forth. But honestly, I would say at this point, I'm very, very, I'm very, very grateful for the chance to write for the U version app. That was not something I
Wow.
expected. It really, people ask me like how I got on the app. I just say it's God because I don't remember like when I applied or why it was accepted. But
Wow.
for me to be able to see that my work is next to all of these amazing biblical authors, right? People who have way more training than I have. But I just said, hey, there need to be some resources on this app where billions of people read the Bible. And I should have something that relates to creativity. And to be straight up with you, not to say that there aren't any other resources, but there weren't a ton of resources about being a creative and called by God and also working in the mainstream arts and entertainment. So I was like, hey, let me go ahead and like try that. So last year I finally got it together. I only had one devotional. Now there are six. So
Whoa.
at this point, I am, yes, that would be like at this point. You know what I mean? Like there's other things I
Yeah.
hope I will accomplish that will make me proud as well. But that one does make me smile every time I realize that I finally got myself together because I had to get back into the writing habit. Working, I had fallen out of the writing. We talk about the music, but I kind of let the writing slip, and I
Mm.
wasn't in a habit, so I wasn't creating and being productive with finishing those things. But I finished six of them. I'm going to try to get some more out this year as I'm recording. But yeah, that makes me super proud that my writing was able to be featured on that in that app.
Congratulations. That's huge. That is awesome. YouVersion, yeah, that's like, very commonplace. And to be able to spread your ministry on there, that's crazy power and prolific to go from one to six devotionals. How do you just like pull out a devotional and just write it down?
It's definitely not just pulling out, and again, this is where I'm being accountable to everyone. I wrote one. I wanted to finish one last. I think it was 2024, and I said I'm going to write one a month. Well, it went 6 more months, and I didn't write a single another one. So last year was my commitment. Like I have to get an editor, so I had to pay an editor. Right? It got that kind of accountability for someone to actually look at my work, and I had to turn it in and make sure it was written correctly. And then each idea, I would say, when you say where did they come from, I kept trying to think of what is an area where creators oftentimes don't feel supported or feel like they're kind of lost. Well, the first one was creators' purpose. I didn't feel like people often connect their purpose to what God called them to do as artists. Because, like we talked about, sometimes it's all about the production or people, how many follow you or popularity. So I wrote a thing about purpose because that was something that was touching me and I felt would help other people. Then I had a great friend of mine who plays with amazing artists. She said, "Hey, I'm really struggling with the timing of when is it time for me to move? When is it time for me to do this?" So I wrote the creator's timing because she talked about it. So every single devotional came from a problem or a situation that I felt another creator was dealing with. And I just wanted to wrap it back to scripture. Okay, well, what does the Bible say about this when creators face blank? You know, dealing with legacy or dealing with purpose or dealing with the struggle, the battle to like control your thoughts. These are all things that I was dealing with and others were dealing with. So that's really where the devotional ideas all came from.
Awesome. Real life experience.
100%.
Great. Have you taken like a spiritual gifts test? Like this is not obviously on my questions, but now I'm just curious. Like your ability to pull out scripture from memory is astounding to me.
Thank you. And I don't remember my I don't remember my findings. I do think I did take that test. All I remember is something about maybe teacher, which made sense, right? Having a
Mm.
teaching gift, and I would obviously, hope I'm using that correctly. And because again, I was teaching elementary school, whether it's teaching music or whatever, I've always just felt like I learn more when I share more. And
Hmm.
so maybe that is part of what, what I'm trying to like work out as I'm like writing and doing the podcast and everything. Is still like working in that teaching area. Just I lowered my class size.
Yeah, yeah. How do you juggle all three? Writing, podcasting, teaching. Well, I guess there's more. Being a dad, being a musician. How do you juggle all of that?
Not always well.
Mm.
Not always well. I think one of the biggest struggles is the idea that something's being left behind. And I love what one of my mentors and guys that I had on my podcast a couple of times is Jordan Rayner. He writes about faith and work. He's an incredible writer. You want to talk about someone who talks about creativity? He wrote the book Call to Create, which basically kind of gave me like, oh, I'm going to template my God and Gigs book behind his Call to Create. But he says something in another book about uh, a quote. I can't get it exactly right, but it says, it's kind of sobering, there will always be unfinished symphonies. In other words,
Mm.
you can't get to everything. This idea that you always will accomplish all the work that you have, whether it's podcasting, in ceramics, and anything, like you're not going to finish it all. There's always going to be something. And here's the blessing for us Christians: we have heaven, which means for me, at least in my theological, imagination, we'll have eternity to work on these tasks. We'll have eternity to work on this. So part of the pressure of, oh, I have to get to the podcasting and balance it all is realizing there's going to be things left undone. Yes, I have to be productive. Yes, I have to do my to-do list. Yes, I need a rhythm and a discipline to work on one thing at a time. Like this week has been a lot of podcasting, but then I have to switch to music because I have a show on Friday.
Mm.
So it's just kind of like everybody else. Hey, what's the first priority today that I can knock off my list to continue to be productive and then move on to the next one, but not getting to the end of the day and feeling this defeated feeling that I didn't exercise all of my gifts every single day. It's not possible and it's not sustainable. So it's been mostly me learning that rhythm of, hey, there's supposed to be a push, but there's also a time to refrain from pushing, right? There's a time for everything in every purpose under heaven. So just learning that balance. I'm not good at it, but it's definitely, I think, again, in a unique creator lifestyle, we each have that balance. And I shouldn't say balance, we each have that rhythm. And
Mm.
we have to learn that it's okay to have those moments where you don't get everything done in every single facet. And it's okay. God will give you that timing and that season and the grace to move in a certain area in each creative area that you're in.
Whew, yeah, that's a good one to remember. Speaking of unfinished art, though, is there a project that you've been thinking about or you started, you want to come back to it? What's kind of on the docket?
Okay, so this is where, like you said, we talked about the book, we talked about, my devotionals, but the one thing I avoid oftentimes because I am not taking my own medicine and not following my own advice is my music. So even this week that we're recording, I have a concert, and the guy asked me, "Hey, do you have some music that kind of promote your concert?" I was like, "Oops, I haven't recorded anything since 2016." And it was
Whoa.
like, and I did feel a little bit of that guilt, right? And I feel like, oh, I should have gotten to this. I should have worked on more. And I had to tell myself, stop it. Like, you were in a season where I just told you I really focused on my writing, and that was the season for that. And it wasn't the season to record albums. But that would be the one that I think is kind of like where God has given me like a grace period but I don't want to leave it undone. So I do want to eventually start recording more music. I do want to get back to writing. And again, that's just for fun and for love. I don't want to necessarily become a recording artist, but these are songs that I enjoy that I think, just make people happy. And it expresses a part of me that I can't express any other way. And so, yeah, I think I'm putting that on my bucket list or whatever you call it. Just the idea of, hey, I would like to do a few more albums and just create music for the sake of making it, like you talked about, just for the joy. Like I enjoy this music, and thankfully, it is not based on my livelihood if I make this music or not.
Hmm.
So that's one thing I would love to pick back up and see if I can get some original songs recorded.
Yeah, we need an album. I'm excited about that.
You'll be the first to know, I promise.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Would you, I only ask this because I've taught sporadically, but do you find teaching like encourages your own creativity, or do you find yourself like spending that creativity on the students that you're teaching?
That's a great question. I definitely don't think I spend it. I think it's definitely more inspiring. It's always great to hear somebody else going through what you're going through and realizing, oh, I'm not the only one that's, like you said, juggling all these different responsibilities and yet trying to stay creative. I'm not the only one that feels sometimes that like there's not enough hours in the day. And then, especially when you hear, hey, they actually have a really cool idea that you can implement, or you had an idea that you started to do it and then you stopped, and then you show them and you say, hey, keep doing that. And just like I said about myself, wait, I can do that too. So I think it's much more of that, rising tide lifts all boats. As I pour into others, they pour into me. The Bible talks about that very clearly, right? He who waters will be himself be watered. So that give and take, and that is better to give and to receive, means I'm always receiving from the people I share with. It's just up to me now to kind of operate in it, right? To act on it. So it's not necessarily anything where I'm not being filled, but it's just, hey, I gotta act. When people give me ideas, if I let them lay dormant in a notepad somewhere, I can't blame them for not filling my tank. It's me that kind of just allows it to sit there and not act on it.
I feel like that's the spiritual miracle of creativity is that like you don't spend it, and like
Yep.
it does just keep growing and growing and growing. And like you said, you're learning things from your students. I found like I was teaching wheel throwing before I really was comfortable with like centering the clay. And I was like, well, I know more than them. So, like I can get them far enough. But like the more I taught, the better I got because I would see what problems they had and then kind of apply it exactly like you said to my life. Be like, hey, this is actually really cool that we can all kind of learn together and share that passion together, which is really awesome. Well, I think we are coming to the end of the podcast, but what do you hope people take away most from our time together today? Or what is a call to action? What's kind of your final words you'd like to share?
Well, number one, Morgan, I hope the final thing will be they're already subscribing to your show. That's the first thing, because this is an amazing podcast. You are an amazing artist and author yourself. And so you have so much to share. So I hope they're already following us. But then after that, I really pray that you would hear kind of like what me and Morgan are sharing, which is that you were created on purpose for a purpose. And that includes your creative ability, whether it's just doing something for fun on the weekends or actually going into full-time work in as a creator. There's a unique creator lifestyle that God gave for you, right? That you are built up, and he says all of us as a spiritual house, but each brick has a certain purpose. And if your brick is not in the right place, the house isn't built. So you have a place to fill, even if it's not necessarily the exact same thing that Morgan or me or any other creator is doing. And again, even if you're not necessarily doing it for a living, I want you to know that God is a creator who made sub creators, and that's you and I, and you can enjoy that. So no, you do not have to be, the next Rembrandt, the next, I don't know, I can't think of a brother. I almost went Taylor Swift. I don't want to name Taylor Swift, but anyway, you don't have to be any of those other big artists in order to have an impact. You can have an impact right where you are just by blessing God and enjoying your creative work. And yeah, wherever that fits in your unique creator lifestyle, embrace it, do it all for the glory of God and the good of others. And yeah, that's what I would share.
Powerful stuff. And follow your podcast as well, the God and Gigs podcast. I'll link all the appropriate links in the show notes. And where can we get your devotion books? I definitely want to read some of those.
Oh, well, okay. Well, you can find pretty much everything. I try to make sure all the links are easy to find. Like you just said, you can go to God and Gigs wherever you're listening or following this. And then if you just go to godandgigs.com, I do have all the links to my U version devotionals. It's easy to find. You can also type in God and Gigs on U version if you're in the app, and it will take you to my page. Or you can just go to there and you'll find all the links, godandgigs.com. And I try to make sure it's easy to find so that, whether it's my books, my devotionals, our podcast, our membership, all of it's a one-stop shop.
Oh, sweet. Perfect. Awesome. We'll definitely check you out on YouVersion. And hopefully we'll talk sooner than 2 years again. You'll have to come back
We will
on or
not
I'll come
wait
on
that
your
long.
show.
No, we have to
Yeah.
make sure this continues.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a complete honor to talk to you once again.
God bless you. Thank you so much for having me.